Okay, we're ready to report out. Who took question number 1? Anybody do question number 1? It was answered in some of the other sessions, so the group that wanted one declined it. How about question number 2? Do we have a group? Okay.
Thanks. What are the principles and practices of engagement power sharing? You have to have a reason to partner. You need respect, human connection, trust, acknowledgement of the power imbalance, a balance of group dynamics, replenishment of the commons, creating safe space, welcoming diverse participants, designing inclusive logistics, ensure there's capacity building for all, acknowledge the history and the legacy of racism and other isms.
Thank you. Number 3, which, who took? Hey, we need to applaud after everybody. Okay, appreciate work here, folks.
So Tom Kotke from Health Partners is build relationships and bridges. First, ask about their aims and pain points. So figure out so that you can solve your pain point and their pain point at the same time. Extend an olive branch. Leverage personal relationships, spouses, anybody, kids. In fact, in John Le Carre's Pigeon Tunnel, he talked about how he was able to get a kid into Britain from the Czech Republic by the wife of the minister put the letter on the breakfast table, and now that kid is a beloved pediatrician in Toronto. But, you know, just anything, anywhere you can sneak in. Find a broker or go between somebody slightly less polarized than the individual you're trying to get to in an organization. Points of affinity and outside your contentious viewpoints. Show your interest in them as people. Find out what they like, what their favorite things are that aren't part of the topic. Meet, what's people? Oh, people. In non-tense situations. Maybe, you know, we talk about coffee time. Go drink coffee with them before there's anything other on the agenda. And so that you can sit down and get to know who they are, what they like, what their face-to-face conversations, baby steps, small wins, compromise. Find a few powerful leaders to support your cause. Certainly within an organization, when top leadership says, you know, you're going to do this, everybody says, oh yeah, you bet. And a reason to convene. And we heard one example from Hood River where their Congress person was musing about a tree from his childhood. And so they're going to get a piece of that tree, and an artist is going to work it up and give it to him. And they think maybe then he'll pay attention to environment.
Let's hear it for group 3.
So we talked about distractors, which are shifting priorities of funders that make people move in different directions. Resources, unfair allocation of resources. So that was the idea that sometimes an academic group will come in and write a nice grant, and by the time you see the money distributed, what goes out to the community is a tiny piece of it. Lack of backbone sort of factors that are funded or are core that keeps things moving forward. A lack of skill base to gain resources is a challenge. A lack of an appropriate team, and there was talk here about the notion of the lived experience part of the team, but also the people who have the technical expertise to be able to sort of bring to fruition things that the people who are having the lived experience are too engaged to having a bad lived experience to actually have the energy and ability to move forward in that particular area. Leadership turnover, lack of business community engagement, truthiness. We talked about the notion of being in a post-truth world and how that can move people in peculiar directions. And then a lack of evidence for some of the things that we sort of know to be the right thing to do, but we haven't quite shown it yet.
How about group 5? You have a group 5? Please read the question.
Yes, I will. Our question was, what was your proudest accomplishment and what has been most meaningful to you in doing this work? Isn't that a fun one? So we have quite a range from, first of all, someone who was able to work to change the governance approach to population health at a hospital, and that included community engagement. For Labelle Goma, we talked about the city officials putting the Labelle Goma logo on all of their letterheads, really owning it. And so it moved from really being an initiative to a movement and recognized the importance of that community voice. In San Francisco, the Board of Supervisors has passed a resolution on what they stand for. That is just recently Matt shared with us. And he might want to read some of that. We talked about the willingness to be innovative and think differently about solving problems and learn from others. Well, this wasn't declared as the most proudest accomplishment. We did talk about the menu of measures within Measure What Matters. And finally, getting state departments to think more creatively about how they can promote equity, being health allies. So I'm talking about non-health state departments.
Thank you, Group 5. How about Group 6 here?
So our question is, have we made mistakes? If you could go back to the beginning and start from scratch, is there anything that you would do differently? As you can imagine, we had nothing on our list, actually. And we had quite a few, and it's actually interesting given that we're all from very different organizations. We all shared a lot of the same mistakes, which I thought was a really interesting learning, whether small nonprofit, large nonprofit that functions in different cities, or a national nonprofit. It's really, national foundation, it's really fascinating. So it means that we still have a lot to learn. So the mistakes, here you go. That at times when we're take a strong advocacy position, we'll meet with the people who also share that position, but we don't take the time to meet with opponents, and which one shows a lack of respect, and two can also have us miss possible opportunities and places to come together. The second is making sure that we are transparent about who we're meeting with and why we're meeting with them, so that everybody who's part of the coalition feels respected and they understand what's happening and they don't feel like they've been, that you've gone around. This third is around having simultaneous strategies or not having simultaneous strategies is a mistake for both community-driven work as well as having a strategy to engage elected officials. The next was failing to set up checks and balances. When we increase our staff's responsibilities and authority, that we really need those checks and balances to prevent challenges related to misuse of resources. We've all done this, celebrating a policy win. Raise your hand if you've done this, celebrating a policy win without having a plan for implementation. Right? Thank you. The next mistake that we made was, really not doing the best job with finding the right balance between providing a lot of structure and not over-structuring so that we don't stifle creativity. And this particularly came up when we were talking about youth and wanting to allow really that creativity to flow. The next was not trusting in the process. So we kind of came into a meeting with a savior mentality, like, oh, I hear you, that's what you want to do, but really this is a better idea, so we might plant it at the beginning. The next was about branding. This was another one that I thought we all could relate to. And we actually came into something and got so caught up in how we were going to brand it for our organization that we lose trust and the partners lose agency in whatever it is that you're trying to really draw a lot of attention to. Failing to recognize the time needed to build connections and relationships, and a false sense that it will just happen organically, so we failed to resource the work appropriately. We failed to be transparent about what didn't work, the process and expectations, and we ignored the historic trauma of that communities face. So we also came up with a couple of solutions. Build in a review of what works and what doesn't to do with the community. So how we can do it better next time, learn from that failure or from the success so that you're failing forward. Be transparent in every way with community members and take a healing approach to community engagement. Thanks, George.
Michelle, how about, let's see, you were six?
We were 6.
So 7 and 8, how ambitious? 2 questions here.
I think we were voluntold to be 7 and 8, but 7 and 8 are related. So before you get too excited about how ambitious we were, we chose to think about data and evaluation together, and so that made it a little bit easier to do 2 questions. I think we identified so first of all, the question asked us how is data used and how are partnerships evaluated, and we decided that we were not feeling great about the current state. So instead we talked about how they could be and how they should be. So recognizing that there are some glimmers of hope in the current that might reflect this vision for the future, mostly we were feeling like we needed a push as opposed to a good job in this particular question. So the big challenge, I'll try to say it in this way, which is to find data use and evaluation frameworks that are both credible in academic and health sector circles and also meaningful for communities and appropriate for this kind of work, which is a different kind of work than what health sector and academia are trained to do. So that is a big challenge. And our take on it collectively was that the current data and evaluation industry that the health sector defaults to does not work in service of community partnerships. So there is a mismatch there. There's an overvalue on counting and sort of causal attribution of thinking about things without fully understanding context and then not approaching evaluation in a deeply participatory way. That said, there is a data and evaluation industry that is very much in the state of the art of working in these ways. So it doesn't need to be built from the ground up. It exists. It just needs to be connected to and valued in the health sectors. And some of the principles that go with that, let's see if I can state this succinctly, is that in the same ways that we've been talking all day today about kind of thinking about what to do and what the priorities are and what success looks like, the evaluation has to be participatory in the same way. So from design, when you think about what are the right questions to be asking, what are the appropriate ways of answering those questions, through how you get the data and the information to answer those questions, and then how you make sense of that, so how you interpret that information, and then how you use it to change course, to claim impact, to motivate through short-term wins. All of that needs to be participatory in the same ways everything else we talked about today need to be participatory. And it is known how to do that in a rigorous, systematic, credible way. So that, I think, was the main content. We tried to ask ourselves, how could we see change to this end? And we focused a little bit on the cautionary tale of having initiative-wide or national menus of metrics. And that while there's some importance to having that so that there's some information you can aggregate across examples, we'd really like to push funders in whatever sector those funders are coming from and community initiatives themselves, even if the funders don't incentivize them to do it, to add to that their own measures and their own approaches to measurement that match what they care about most. So you still have to report on whatever your funder requires you to report on. And actually, if the funders were to have both of those things, both the required and the flexible, and we also aggregated all of those different examples of the flexible, we would start to realize here's where you have rigor and systematic approaches, and here's models and tools that everyone can use. So we would aggregate that learning while also aggregating a bunch of things that we can count. Anything else? That's what they said. Yes, that was 7 and 8. I don't think there is a 9. Does that mean evaluation gets the last word and social media doesn't?
We've got more groups here. We have a 9. Did we have the 8? We had another 8.
I will. We're also overachievers and did number 2 and number 8. And in number 8, what I would add is that there are a lot of ways of measuring change in partnerships, and one of them is asking people how they perceive the partnership to be working. And there are a lot of ways to go about getting that information from folks. And it could be story, it could be video, it could be interview, et cetera. And how are they being responded to out into the community? So like social media is one way to see what's the response out there. And changes in policies and in the environment, et cetera. But also what's often seen are soft process measures, are actual impacts in the social norms, in the balance of power, in relationships. And so those things are also measurable and are things that also demonstrate how, with the new resources, the new relationships, are those efforts sustainable? What's been achieved and those relationships and the partnership sustainable beyond a grant?
Thank you, overachiever. Question 9.
Yes, I will. Question 9 says, how can community health partnerships use communications and social media to advance health improvement agendas? So we started this by saying the first step in communication is listening and trying to define who your audience is and what the issue is. Then once you've done that, you want to define your shared vision so that you know what you're communicating is relevant to your audience. You want to have a common language. Make sure that, for example, today, people who weren't familiar with our language learned a whole language that a bunch of us have been speaking for a long time. And you want to make sure that the vehicles you use for communication are trusted sources. So what I might think is a trusted source is the Federal Register. Not a whole lot of people will read. So you have to find what are the trusted sources, what will your community partners want to read, listen to. Then we also decided that there are different ways of communicate. You can use things other than language, but also actions. What we saw with the Tenderloin District, just watching the crossers, the people who accompanied, whether it was an old person or young kids across the street, making sure that what you're doing is visible and the community can see it. So you're communicating with your actions. And then we turned our direction to social media. And I don't know that any of us at the table were experts with social media. George and I have Twitter accounts that we set up and we don't really know what to do with. But we decided, thanks to some younger folks, that we knew that Twitter was a peer-to-peer communication. So it's not just the boss or the community leader sending messages out. Others can participate, retweet, using text messages. It's immediate, it's rapid. We talked about how you can, especially depending on your community or your audience, you might have a lot of folks who don't like to schedule, months in advance, and they like to do something spontaneously. So with Twitter and texting, you can do some sort of a flash mob event, whether you need a meeting. If there's an urgent communication relevant to your mission, your vision, you can get it out quickly. And we talked a little bit about Facebook and Instagram, but decided it really was texting and Twitter that seemed to be the vehicles to use, and also gave people a sense of empowerment because it's a two-way street. They can retweet, they can tweet back. And also we got into a little bit of the data collection. Perhaps you can use some of your social media networks, your tweeting to collecting data. What's relevant? How many times is something retweeted? But I think that's it. That was our expertise.
Thank you, Group 9, and I want to thank all of you for your input. Like I said, it'll be recorded and remembered forever and ever. Now we're entering into a time of day when we can reflect on the day. All of us are welcome to participate, and I get to go first because I have the microphone. And then we'll pass it around to those of you that will offer your insights, add whatever you think was overlooked, maybe some things that you want to emphasize, some things you'd like clarification about, if you want to ask questions of the audience or of anybody in particular. So it's a time for sharing and collaboration. So actually we're putting into practice partnership. Think of ourselves as a big partnership here in this room, and acknowledging each other's humanity and acknowledging respect and trust and all of the other things that we've talked about. And so we'll practice our best practices in what we learned today. Reflecting on the day, to me, brings up a couple of adages that I think are important. There was one that was mentioned, and I've used before in presentations, is nothing about us without us. That communities are very intent on making sure that if they're going to be studied, if they're going to be involved, that they have to have their members at a table with shared power, respected, given the capacity and the tools so that there's full participation and they're enabled to do so. And so there's really an issue here of respect and involvement. I think that we've spoken about a great deal and have mentioned in various ways and said it in different terms. So I think it's very important for us to think about that and picture ourselves in a different way. The other point I wanted to make is about what happened with this last presidential election and who connected to community or who ostensibly connected to communities and heard what communities had to say. And I think it's a lesson for scientists. It's a lesson for people in health to be maybe humbled somewhat by those of us that tend to meet among ourselves, again, our own audience of people that are friendly to our point of view, but we need to think more carefully about those who've been left out of the conversation, those who we've not connected with because maybe it hasn't been convenient. Their point of view is different. They come from a different part of the country. They represent something that doesn't match our belief system. But it is incredibly important for us to connect to all sectors in society, or else we could lose the issue. We could lose the idea. We could lose actually the point that we're trying to make if it rings hollow by not having the support that we're supposing we have by just, again, associating with those who support our point of view. The other lesson I think that I've learned from today is one of deliberation, that we in forming partnerships need to be very deliberate in doing so. There's no one single formula. There is not a cookbook that can be said, this is how you do partnerships, this is how you grow community health, and have that be dogma. No such thing. We're not at a point now, and I doubt if we ever will be, where we can say there's a one size fits all in terms of community building. And what shown for me also is the fact that it takes a lot of work. It's hard work to work with communities. We can't rush in and expect people to fall in line and change to happen immediately. Even if you have the most wonderful idea in the world, you can't expect that pushing that on others is necessarily going to result in change right away. And this is the third adage of the day for me, which is go slow to go fast. You start out slow in working with communities. Sometimes it takes years to gain the trust and the participation and common understanding to build a common vision, and then following a common will to get a particular task done. I'm reflecting on our Building Healthy Communities work and how, to me, frustrating it was to wait year after year for actual directed work focused on a disease prevention outcome like obesity prevention to happen. I came from a world where we gave money or received money to do a particular project, and then you would have your outcome within a year, 2 or 3 years, because you put that project in place and gave the community instructions and money what to do to get that project done, and X number of people were trained, or X number of people lost weight, or whatever. It doesn't happen that way if you're really building community for community change. It really is about giving up that right of making decisions for others and handing it over to the community to decide for themselves once they have the capacity to do so. And they're the ones that will decide when that capacity is sufficient for them to do so. So we heard that said over and over and over in the various stories by our panels. And I'm very appreciative for that, because I think every single community, whether they were in Missouri or Salinas or Louisville or in California, it doesn't really matter. They're all the same kind of considerations that we need to give for allowing for communities to work together in partnerships, to build those partnerships up, and allowing sufficient time for great things to happen, because it will. Once they've gone slow to build up that capacity to make decisions, they all want that change to happen. They all want a better life for themselves. And once they have the tools and the resources to do that, they'll move quickly to make life better for themselves and make the necessary change for improved population health. So those are my observations for the day. And I want to invite all of you now to think about the questions you might have and the observations you might have, and please share them with the group.
Just a couple. I've been relatively quiet today, but just one, just a comment about measurement, and maybe about sort of balance from the bias in the room today, from the perspective of a system-level measurement person. The discussion today was a lot about the importance of making measurement local to serve communities and to make the measures relevant and meaningful to the people in the communities. I just want to present also, I totally agree with that, and want to present also just sort of the balance perspective there. And that is that it's also important to learn from other places. And there's great power in not having to invent everything locally. And one way to do that is to have some kind of common framework for measurement that others can learn from you and you can learn from others. If everything is measured and invented locally, it makes it very hard. It's very hard to aggregate stories. Stories are really powerful, but I think they need to be accompanied by the measurement. In the report out, I know you weren't able to report out your full conversation, but you talked about measure what's important locally and then do what the funders require for you to do. And I think there's more than just doing what the funders require. It's coming up with a system of measurement that for which you can share learning. Just the second quick observation is that I love Martha's question about, this is the roundtable on population health. Is health the right way to frame these improvement efforts? After one of these last meetings, Tom and I wrote about maybe changing our language from health in all policies to well-being in all policies. And George and I were talking after, maybe it's even bigger, that maybe well-being is just another set of words that aren't that meaningful. But it is moving it out of that narrow framework of health. I like the answer best about, well, what we really want to do is improve our communities. And so I think rethinking that language about health and our frame of the dominance of health may not be the frame that communities feel.
Thank you very much. Could you identify yourself for the record?
Matt Stiefel from Kaiser Permanente and 100 Million Healthier Lives.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Karen Ben-Moshe with the Health and All Policies Task Force. One thing that I've been thinking about is going back to the idea around asset framing, which I think Shelton spoke about, and really struck me because I work at the state level, and I think there is an effort to do more to support communities that have been impacted by bad policies in the past. But in order to do that, we then identify them as disadvantaged communities, environmental justice communities, then we sort of do put these labels on them that can shed a negative light. And so it's something I'm been thinking about, and that the staff that I work with really struggle with, is how to do right by communities without then kind of re-traumatizing them in the way that we talk about them. And so I don't have an answer there, and if any of you do, I would love to hear it, but it is something that I know we're really struggling with and are thinking about. So I really appreciated those couple of slides and that discussion. So thanks.
Tom Kotke from Health Partners. Folks may know about this, but I just learned about this the other day. There's a chap, David Rock, who does, Dr. David Rock, you can look on his website, does functional MRI. And he says that there's 5 things that either turn the brain on or turn the brain off. And he uses the acronym SCARF. So status, constancy, autonomy, relationships, and fairness. And you can see if we go charging into a community and tell them, okay, this is what you have to do, their status goes down. If we have changes, the old helicopter kind of academic visitation where the changes are, as, just as constant or as unrelenting as, the direction of the flag on the flagpole out here. We tell them what to do, their autonomy, they're not autonomous, there's no personal relationships, and they feel they're being treated unfairly. Their brains freeze up, and there's no kidding, they turn us off. And so if we use that acronym SCARF to think of how do we approach people? We give them status by asking them how do you think you would like to approach this problem? We don't make too many changes. We give them autonomy. We create relationships, and we treat people fairly. Perhaps that gives us an advantage in helping people move forward to fix the problems in their own way, in their own problems that they identify.
I'm Mary Lou Gakey. I'm a member of the Round Table, and I'd like to say that I feel this was a very hope-filled day, and it was, to me, so inspirational to see people from all over the country, all different sizes and types of communities, really putting the community to work to solve its own problems and working in partnership. And I was reflecting on Alexis de Tocqueville's book, Democracy in America, 200 years ago, and what he was saying is these Americans are really curious. They love to help each other out, and not just people in their own village and not just people in their own origin, but they love to help each other out. And I think what I saw today is the level of skill and commitment and knowledge that people are using is so great, and they're sharing it, and they're sharing it with us and with each other, and that's what we have to be hope-filled about now.
Shoma Stout from 100 Million Healthier Lives in IHI. I too was so inspired in hearing the stories of these communities and going to the Culture of Health Prize winners and hearing those stories and going to the fall gathering. And it just, one of the things that struck me is how much more we would gain if we did, if we took Natalie Burke's challenge from the morning of thinking about letting go of privilege, of not needing to be the saviors of community, but rather trusting communities to be part of to be able to create their own healing, if we can offer a support process. And so as we were thinking in this last session, it made me wonder, what if instead of funding communities to do the things that we think are needed to create change, what if we funded communities to make progress on their journey of transformation, for growing their own capacity, for learning what it takes, wherever they're at, to be making progress on that journey. And I was reminded of some really interesting data that's come out, that there are organizations that choose to, and this has come out actually in several things recently that we've looked at IHI, that whether it's employers that are trying to create employee wellness or organizations that like ACOs that are trying to perform, the difference between the ones that are performing and achieving outcomes and savings and those that aren't is that the ones that are achieving outcomes chose to do it because they thought it was the right thing to do. So they just did whatever they were going to do because it made sense, and they made decisions that were very different because they prioritized doing what was right more than, and interestingly, as they did that, they were actually the ones that saved money. And I think that there's something, an important lesson to be learned in that. I think there's enormous inefficiency to believing we know what's right and to let the money be the driver of sustainability. And instead, I wonder if what it looks like to let our belief in community and the abundance that community has within it be the driver for doing what we do, and what the implications would be for us as funders, or not me, but for others as funders, if we were to be able to invest in that.
So, Martha Gold, member of the Roundtable. This has been a wonderful day, and it certainly gives a lot of inspiration at a time when I feel like I need some inspiration. I have real questions about how one engages people who have points of view that are not just and are not fair. And so the idea that is, being promulgated of bringing everybody into the room and finding common ground doesn't always work for me. And it's interesting because it's been a tension at this roundtable about how broad a canvas one draws so that everybody comes under the umbrella versus, what you do when you have to argue and fight and, sort of prevail when others think differently. And so that's just a meditation on today. I think there's great work to be done about people who want to work together to achieve good things and justice and fairness. But I think there are a lot of people who, don't think in that way. And I think that we have to be careful about not being too Pollyannish about that sort of issue.
Thank you, Martha. This is Doria Escobar. I was thinking the same thing, but I've leaning towards a different conclusion. I believe that if we put more of a focus on the shared values and the principles around which we're willing to work together, then that to me is more clear about who's going to be in the room than what sector they represent. If people don't want to work together, they're not going to show up. And so I have been in change processes where I have significant differences and disagreements with end goals or strategies or tactics. And I've been in groups where we've had to stop and name the disrespect or the disrespect for our shared values and come back to that in order to be okay with not agreeing. And that requires first building human relationships and being explicitly in agreement that we're willing to do that. And if not, then people self-select or they're invited not to participate.
Just a Pete Knox from Labelle Goma from Bellin Health in Green Bay. There's a couple of reflections for me. Kind of at the end of the day, for me, this is about empowering communities to dream and realize those dreams. And I think in our own experiences and communities we've built, today many times the voices of the few are dominating the voices of the many. And this, I think, is about empowering the many to have a stronger voice. And there are always going to be people on the fringe, but they many times today tend to dominate. And I think it is about creating that collective voice that is stronger in terms of what it is the community wants to achieve. And I probably have, I don't know if I have a different opinion from what was stated earlier, but I think we really can learn from why so often what we're trying to do fails. And I think we should study that. And I don't think this is a random walk. I really don't. I think that there is a roadmap. I think that there's commonality that we need to understand. I think there's a common set of principles, concepts, and building blocks that can be put into that roadmap. I personally don't think as we move into the future, we can continue to tell our stories in all different languages. I think that at some point, we have to develop common language and be able to tell common stories. So those are my reflections on today. It was a great day. It's just wonderful things going on. I just wonder what would happen if we tried to take all of this and bring it together and understand the commonality and the common building blocks and the common components of what we're all doing so that we have something that we can begin to really rally around and create momentum around in the future. Those are my reflections.
Bobby Milstein from Rethink Health and a member of the Roundtable. And I think I want to take that even a step further. I think the examples that we've seen here today are very inspiring, but they are not the norm. And I guess I'm wondering whether the synthesis of the practice that we're seeing here, and many of the presenters talked about the deep roots of the practice that you're involved with, really ought not develop into defining new standards for the field. What is expected when you're in a situation of trying to orchestrate change at this level with so many stakeholders and processes that need to get fulfilled one way or another, and there are better and worse ways of doing that, it would seem. And short of having a complete science base around what is right, I don't think there's inconsistency with saying there isn't a dogma and a formula. On the other hand, there are standards of excellence in doing this work, and I think we've seen some examples of it here, and I don't know that we're all that far away from being able to summarize some of those, and I would love to see the field go in that direction.
Well, this is Ann Daviazzi from Trust for America's Health. I really appreciated being here today. Particularly thank you to the staff and the speakers, because the speakers really, I felt, shared so much wisdom as well as were vulnerable to share how they failed forward. And I really, really appreciate that. I can't do much more reflecting than that because I'm a kind of person who takes a long time to reflect. But in terms of what questions I have and what I've been getting more and more curious about through the day, one of the things we didn't talk about as much is agency. And I'm really interested in exploring the literature on how agency improves health and thinking about, so community engagement as a strategy, an imperative really for community change, but also the impact it has on the health of the people that are empowered. And I think that could be a really new way of thinking about community engagement for public health, and very interested in working to develop policies on how to move that forward. So, and this is something we've been thinking about at TIFA for a while, just to connect it to the other thread today around health equity. It was something that came up when we did focus groups of leaders in partnership with the NAACP and Salute America to explore why we weren't getting the results in obesity prevention in those communities. And so these topics came up as a part of those focus group interviews. So I think there's a connection there, and it's another route of exploration as we continue to dig deeper. But just thank you again to everybody, and participants included. Everybody really contributed so much today. So as a member of the planning committee, I really appreciate that everybody jumped in really to make today a success.
Hello. I enjoyed today very much as well, and I'm a career transition professional, transitioning from managing complex change in Fortune 500 corporations and looking for a new path that's more fulfilling. And the conversation here today is really exciting to me because you're looking at so many of the factors of the interconnected system, and it's wonderful to know there's a whole arena where people are seeking to make good things happen in the world using this kind of a view of the world. And what I wanted to say is what I learned is that one of the most important things that we can do is bring ourselves to look at the world through someone else's eye, to build eyes, to build understanding as a starting point for change, really. And through using this approach in my work, I've saved companies hundreds of thousands of dollars, because if they try to push a change through that someone's resisting, that's going to come back through those people trying to undermine the change being effective. And by saying, I feel some resistance here, let's sit down and talk about this, it's brought up the reason for that resistance, and then it's made the ultimate solution better and more successful. And one of the people I studied that inspired me to go to my profession was Nelson Mandela. And I remember a story that I read where he was in prison with some of his colleagues, and the prison guard who was watching over them was feeling kind of friendly towards them, and he threw them onto the ground. He threw some of his sandwich to feed them. And Nelson Mandela's comrades were terribly offended that he would feed them in this way. And Nelson Mandela said, well, just wait. Because he stepped into the shoes of this guard who had been raised in apartheid South Africa with this mindset and kind of brainwashing about who the people were. And he looked and said, this was a friendly gesture that this man did to throw us a sandwich on the ground. And the people trusted him enough to listen, and they started eventually building that friendship, and it led to good things happening. So I guess that's what I want to, I've learned so much, and that's what I want to bring to the conversation, is how important it is to step into someone else's shoes and see the world through their eyes, how they're hearing you and seeing you and understanding what you want to accomplish. So thank you everybody.
Hi, I'm Mary Pitman. I'm president of the Public Health Institute and a member of the Roundtable. And I want to echo my thanks for the organizers and all of the speakers today. I thought it was an extraordinary day. It gave us, I think, some wonderful illustrations to learn from. It gave us, I think, hope. I've been going to a lot of meetings and haven't walked away feeling like, oh, there's something to be hopeful about. But I also believe that this is a room full of shared values, and we've talked about shared values. And I'm concerned that we are facing a big tsunami of change that's going to come that is not based on the shared values of the community work we talked about today. And I really believe that we have to do some deep work on understanding even further. There were some good suggestions and ideas that came up today about how, I think, Shelton, you talked a little bit about that, about how do you frame your work in a way that you can be open and accepting of others. I'm fearful. I don't know that I have the tools to be able to really address some of the challenges that we're going to be facing to keep this really great community work going forward. And so I'm hoping that we can continue this dialogue in a learning mode and an activist mode to make sure that we don't lose sight of these values that have really driven all of this wonderful work that we've talked about today. So I'm leaving hopeful, but I'm also leaving very open to new learning.
So being able to be a panelist was an honor, and I think about the staff and the coordination that it took and the phone calls, and we did one phone call and then it turned into a smaller group phone call, and the team that I worked with as panelists, I'm just so full of gratitude to have been able, and it worked, right? So this is like when we were on the phone, like we didn't know that it was gonna work. And I remember when I walked in this space, I was like, man, this room is really small. So, but it worked, and so that gives me a lot of hope, right? Because it worked in spite of. I think about this young man who went to this wise guru, and he asked him. He said, how can I be successful? And the guru said, meet me in the morning. We're in Louisville, so we have the Ohio River. And the young man showed up. And he had a full suit on, tie, vest. I mean, he was dressed. And the guru waded out in the water and told him, come on out here. He started walking out there, and as he got farther out there, the guru would back up a little bit more, and he would walk some more, and he would back up. He got there where the water was up to his chest, and he said, keep coming. When he got out, when the water was up to his chin, this older guru gentleman jumped and pushed his shoulders down under the water. And he's holding them, and he's holding them, and he's holding them. And just before the young man felt as if he was going to pass out, he lets him up. And he asked him, he said, when I had you under that water, what was the one thing you wanted more than anything? And he said, I wanted to breathe. He said, when you want this thing, when you want success as bad as you want to breathe, that's when you'll have it. And so oftentimes the work we do is that critical. It's life or death. We're talking about 9-year differences from one zip code and another zip code. So we have to have that sense of urgency and determination in spite of. Thank you.
Jose Montero from the CDC now, and a member of the roundtable, 3 weeks on the job. Thank you very much to the organizers. Quite a powerful and inspiring day. Actually, it took me back to my roots when I did community engagement through participatory methodologies. But going back to today, a couple of things is this work is so important, but we need to keep going because it's the one that is going to keep us honest as institutions. It's a back and forth, and the pendulum goes one way and the other. There is only one place where we can identify what the real needs are, and it is through the community work. We need to keep going and keep engaged the institutions regardless. We need to keep the institutions engaged. It's not an us against them, it's not a them against us. Because if we adopt that dynamic, we will not make progress. It may not move as fast as we want. It will move faster in some places, it will move slower in others. But this community work is the one that will keep us on track and allows us to know toward what end is what we are moving. So unless we have those goals clear, know how to measure so we know what's the progress that we are making and toward what end, things are going to be more difficult. Everything costs money. Everything costs time, and everything needs people. We need to be able to figure out how to marry those things and to be able to present those needs to wherever we need to take them. If we are unified and we believe that we are going the right way, we are going to get there. But we need to be systematic in the way that we define the goals, in the way that we assess them, in the way that we quantify the results and the way that we interact with organizations. I know that I am in the bureaucratic side of that. We need to hear what is happening here. We need to know where we are doing right and where we aren't. And unless we have this honest community engagement, we won't. But the other thing that we seldom do is to look at what doesn't work for us internally as a community. So what processes did work, but what processes didn't? So we prevent the other groups from engaging and losing time and resources on that, and maybe losing the only opportunity that they will have to really achieve change. We can help each other and all of us by showing what works, but showing in many places what didn't and why. That is an incredibly important lesson that many times we don't bring up enough. So just want to encourage us to keep that in mind as we move forward.